My name is Jess. I am 36 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas, with a balcony that catches the morning light and a kitchen I have cooked real meals in every single day for the past year, which sounds ordinary until you understand where I was 18 months ago. 18 months ago I was sitting on the floor of my cousin's spare bedroom surrounded by 2 suitcases and a garbage bag of things I had grabbed in 40 minutes, and I was listening to my aunt say, through the wall, that she gave me 2 weeks before I ended up back where I started. My family has always had a gift for that. For knowing exactly how to say the thing that will find the softest part of you and press on it until you understand, clearly and completely, that they do not believe in you. What they did not know, what I did not fully know yet myself, was that I was 3 days from the worst moment of my life and 18 months from a life none of them would recognize. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because the floor of that spare bedroom is not where the story starts. It starts 6 years earlier, with a man named David, and a version of myself I am still in the process of forgiving. I met David at 28. I was working as an office manager for a dental practice, a job I was good at but had never intended to stay in, the way you end up in places you meant to pass through and then look up one day to find you have been there for 3 years. David was a contractor. He came in to fix the waiting room ceiling and he asked me to coffee with the easy confidence of a man who was used to people saying yes. I said yes. He was charming in the specific way of men who have spent years learning which version of themselves lands best in which room. With my family he was respectful, handy, the kind of man who offered to help carry things without being asked. With my friends he was funny, relaxed, good at remembering names. With me, in private, he was different things at different times, and the gap between the public version and the private one grew slowly enough that I did not see it becoming what it became. We moved in together after 8 months. He suggested it and I agreed because the apartment he found was nicer than mine and because I had told myself that the things that made me uneasy were things I was being too sensitive about. I was not too sensitive. But I would not understand that for 5 more years. What David did was not dramatic. That is the part that takes the longest to explain to people who have not lived inside it. He did not hit me. He did not scream. What he did was quieter and more complete than that. He had opinions about everything I did, delivered in the reasonable tone of a man who only wanted what was best. He had thoughts about how I dressed, how I spent my time, which friends were good influences. He managed the money because he was better with numbers, he said, and I had never been particularly organized, he said, and this was true enough that I accepted it. He decided, over 5 years, who I was. And I let him, because letting him was easier than the alternative, and because I had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that I had been someone before I met him. The end came on a Tuesday in October. Not with a fight. With a spreadsheet. I had been putting small amounts of money into an account he did not know about. Not for any dramatic reason, I had not yet admitted to myself that I was planning anything. I did it the way you leave a window unlocked without knowing why, the way some part of you prepares for something before the rest of you is ready to name it. He found the account. He did not yell. He sat across from me at our kitchen table with the spreadsheet open on his laptop and he explained, in the patient voice he used when I had disappointed him, exactly what my having a private account said about my character. He said I was sneaky. He said I had trust issues. He said he was not sure he could be with someone who operated in secrets. I sat across from him and I listened and then I heard myself say, very quietly, that I wanted to leave. He looked at me. I said it again. I said I wanted to leave and I wanted to take my things and I would find somewhere to go. He said, still in that patient voice, that I had nowhere to go. He was right, technically. I had drifted from most of my friends over 5 years of slow-managed distance. I had a family, but my relationship with them was its own complicated thing, and the idea of calling them and admitting what I was admitting was almost as frightening as staying. Almost. I called my mother first. She said she was sorry but they did not have the space right now and it was not a good time with my father's health and she hoped things would work out with David. I called my sister. She said I should think carefully before doing something I could not undo and reminded me that David had always been so good to me and maybe I was not seeing things clearly. I called my aunt, my mother's sister, who had a spare room and a house big enough and who I had helped move furniture for 3 years ago when her own marriage ended. She said I could come for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I packed 2 suitcases and a garbage bag in 40 minutes. I did not let myself look at the apartment as I left because I knew if I let myself look I would not be able to walk out. I carried my bags to my car, the car I owned, the one thing in my life that was entirely mine, and I drove to my aunt's house. I sat on the floor of the spare bedroom that night with my bags around me and I understood, clearly and without softness, that I had nothing. Not nothing in the dramatic sense. I had a job, a car, 2 suitcases. But I had nothing built. No savings to speak of because the money had always been managed. No network because the connections had been managed. No clear sense of who I was or what I wanted because that had been managed most of all. I was 30 years old and I was starting from a floor in a spare bedroom and the only people who were supposed to be in my corner had spent the day telling me to go back. That night, through the wall, I heard my aunt tell my uncle she gave me 2 weeks. I did not cry. I had been crying, in private, for 5 years. I was finished with crying. I started making a list instead. The first week at my aunt's house I did 3 things. I opened a bank account in my name only, at a bank David had no connection to, and I deposited every cent I had, which was $412. I called my employer and asked for my salary to be redirected to the new account starting immediately. My boss, a woman named Sandra who had hired me 6 years ago and who had watched me become quieter and more careful over the years without ever asking why, said of course, and then said, "While I have you, we've been thinking about expanding the billing department. Would you be interested in a conversation?" I said yes. The third thing I did was find a therapist. This took more courage than the bank account because it required admitting out loud to a stranger what the last 5 years had been, and I had spent 5 years learning to describe my life in ways that did not require that admission. Her name was Dr. Okafor. She had an office on the 2nd floor of a building near the library and a way of asking questions that made the answers feel like things you had always known and simply needed permission to say. In our first session she asked me what I wanted. Not what I needed, not what the situation required. What I wanted. I sat with that question for a long time. I said I wanted to feel like myself again. I said I was not entirely sure who that was. She said that was the right place to start. My 2 weeks at my aunt's house became 3, and then 4, and then my aunt stopped mentioning the timeline because I was quiet and I cleaned up after myself and I was gone most of the day. I was not invisible, but I made myself easy to overlook, which was a skill I had developed over 5 years and which, in this particular context, was useful. I was using the time. Every hour that was not spent at work or sleeping or in Dr. Okafor's office was spent on something I had not done in years, learning what I was capable of. The billing conversation with Sandra led to a promotion. Not a large one, not yet, but real, a title change and a salary increase that, combined with not splitting costs with David, meant I could actually save. I opened a second account for savings and I put $200 in it at the end of the first month. $200 is not a lot. But I looked at that account every day that first month the way you look at something you planted, checking for evidence that it is real. It was real. I started running. This sounds unrelated and it is also entirely related. I had not exercised in years because David had opinions about gyms and about the time it took and about the particular way certain kinds of exercise were unnecessary. I started running at 6 in the morning before the world was fully awake, along a route by the river near my aunt's house, and in those 40 minutes every morning I was entirely in my own body doing a thing no one had an opinion about, and it was, for reasons I could not have explained at the time, one of the most important things I did in those early months. I signed up for a course. Online, self-paced, in healthcare administration, an area adjacent to the dental practice work I had been doing for years but more structured, more credentialed, the kind of thing that could open doors my current position couldn't. I took it on my laptop in the spare bedroom after my aunt and uncle went to sleep, headphones in, the screen the only light. 6 weeks in, I found an apartment. Small, 1 bedroom, 3rd floor, the kind of place where the windows were older than the appliances and the closet was technically just an alcove with a curtain rod. But it was mine. My name on the lease. My name only. I moved in on a Saturday in December. I had a borrowed air mattress, a lamp from a thrift store, a coffee maker that had been Sandra's spare, and my 2 suitcases. My family did not offer to help me move. My aunt said she was glad I had found something. My mother said she hoped I knew what I was doing. My sister did not call. I blew up the air mattress in my new living room and I lay on it and looked at the ceiling of my apartment and I felt something I had not felt in so long I did not immediately recognize it. I felt like myself. Not a finished version. Not a healed version. Just myself, with my 400 square feet and my borrowed lamp and my ceiling to look at, with no one in the adjacent room having opinions. It was everything. I want to tell you about the months that followed without making them sound easy, because they were not easy. Easy is not the right category for what they were. They were clarifying. I worked. I studied. I ran every morning that the weather allowed and some that it didn't. I saw Dr. Okafor every other week and I did the work she gave me, which was the slow uncomfortable work of understanding how I had let 5 years happen and making sure I understood it clearly enough that it could not happen again. I did not date. I was not interested in dating. I was interested in myself, which sounds selfish until you understand that for 5 years I had not been particularly interested in myself at all. I learned to cook. This sounds small and it was also large. David had cooked or we had ordered, and the kitchen had been his space in the way that most spaces had been his, and I had lost the habit of feeding myself with any intention. I bought a cookbook from the library's used book sale for $1 and I started at the beginning and I worked my way through it and I ate dinner at my small table every night and it was, in the category of things that brought me back to myself, surprisingly high. I finished the course. I passed the certification exam on a Thursday afternoon in March and I sat in the testing center parking lot and called no one because there was no one to call, and I thought, I will remember this moment. The one where the only person who knew it happened was me. 6 months after I moved into the apartment, Sandra called me into her office. She said the practice was expanding. She said she needed someone to manage the new location. She said she had been watching me for months and she believed I was the person for it. She told me the salary. It was more money than I had ever made. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I want to tell you what that felt like because I think it is important. It did not feel like rescue. It did not feel like things finally going my way after a string of bad luck. It felt like the result of a calculation, of every morning run and every night course and every hour spent in that small apartment doing the quiet work of becoming someone who could say yes to that question and mean it. I had built toward it. That is what it felt like. Not luck. Construction. My family found out about the promotion through my cousin Bev, who had heard from her mother, who had heard from Sandra's receptionist, who apparently knew someone at my aunt's church. My mother called me that night. She said she had heard I was doing well. She said she was glad. She said it in the warm, slightly surprised tone of a person who had not expected this particular outcome. I said thank you. She said she had always believed in me. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the phone call from the spare bedroom floor, the one where she said it was not a good time. I thought about my sister saying I should think carefully before doing something I could not undo. I thought about my aunt through the wall. 2 weeks, she said, 2 weeks. I said thank you, Mom. I said I had to go. I did not say the other thing. Not because I was being diplomatic. But because I had understood something in those 18 months about the difference between the conversations that cost you something and the conversations that give you something, and I no longer had energy for the costly ones. I had things to do. The new location opened in October. 14 months after the floor of the spare bedroom. I managed the hiring, the setup, the systems, the first 6 weeks of operations. I worked long hours and I did not mind the long hours because the hours were mine, spent on something I had built toward, and that is an entirely different kind of tired than the tired of 5 years of being managed. Sandra told me, at the end of the first quarter, that the new location was performing above projections. She said, "This is because of you." I said thank you. I meant it simply, without the complicated relationship with compliments that I had developed over 5 years of being told my judgment could not be trusted. I was getting better at accepting true things. The call from my sister came on a Saturday in November. 15 months after the spare bedroom floor. She wanted to have lunch. She said she had been thinking about me. She said she felt bad about some of the things she had said when I left David. We met at a cafe near my apartment, not near hers, because my apartment was in a part of the city she had never been to, in a neighborhood that had, in the 15 months since I moved there, become mine in all the ways a neighborhood becomes yours, the coffee place where they knew my order, the running route along the river, the farmer's market on Saturdays. She arrived 10 minutes late and looked around the cafe with the particular expression of someone recalibrating what they expected. She had expected, I think, something smaller. A sadder version of the floor she had imagined me on. She had expected, somewhere in the back of her thinking, that I had been surviving in the way that people survive when they have been foolish enough to leave a stable situation for an unstable one. She had not expected the woman who stood up to greet her. I was not trying to make a point with what I was wearing or how I looked. But I had spent 15 months becoming someone who was comfortable in her own body, who ran every morning, who ate real food, who slept well because her nervous system was no longer braced for the next quiet correction. It shows. Becoming yourself shows, even when you are not performing it. She hugged me. She said I looked incredible. I said I felt good. We ordered. She told me about her life, her husband, her kids, the renovation they were doing. I listened. I asked questions. I was genuinely interested. Then she said she was sorry. She said she had thought I was making a mistake and she had said so and she had been wrong and she was sorry. I looked at her across the table. I said thank you. I said I appreciated it. I said I was glad we were having lunch. She said she had told their mother about my promotion. She said Mom was proud. I said that was nice to hear. She said, "You always could have done this, you know. You were always this person." I thought about that. About the floor of the spare bedroom. About the $412 and the air mattress and the ceiling I had looked at and felt like myself under. I said, "I know. I just needed the room to find out." David reached out at month 16. A text. Brief, carefully worded, in the tone he used when he had decided what effect he wanted to create. He said he had heard I was doing well. He said he was glad. He said he thought about me sometimes. I read it once. I did not respond. Not out of anger. I had done the anger, in Dr. Okafor's office and on the running path and in the small apartment late at night when it came up through the floorboards of everything I was building. I had done the anger and I had done the grief and I had done the long slow work of understanding what had happened without letting it be the central story of my life. David's text was not the story. It was a footnote. I put my phone down and I made dinner and I ate at my table by the window and I watched the street below, which was doing what streets do in November, busy and lit, full of people who were all in the middle of something. I was in the middle of something too. Something that was entirely mine. Month 18. My cousin Bev invited me to a family gathering. A birthday for my uncle, on my mother's side, the kind of extended family event where everyone ends up in the same backyard and you spend 2 hours catching up in the particular way of people who see each other 3 times a year. I almost did not go. I went because Bev asked specifically and because she had been, in the 18 months since the spare bedroom, the one member of my family who had consistently checked in without agenda, and I valued that enough to show up for her. I drove to my parents' house, which I had not been to since before I left David, and I parked and I sat in my car for a moment, which I have learned is sometimes necessary when you are about to walk into a version of your past. Then I went in. My mother hugged me at the door. She looked at me in the way mothers look at their children when they are surprised by who they have become, and then she said, quickly, that I looked wonderful. My father shook my hand and said he had heard good things. My aunt, the one with the spare bedroom, the 2 weeks, was in the backyard. She looked up when I came through the door. She had that particular combination of expressions that happens when someone sees a version of you that does not match what they were expecting. She said, "Jess." My goodness. I said hello. I asked about her garden, which I could see behind her. She told me about it. We talked for 10 minutes, pleasantly, normally. She said, "At some point, you've done really well for yourself." I said thank you. She said, "I always thought you would, you know." I thought about the wall. About her voice coming through it. 2 weeks. I said, "Thank you." Just that. I did not hand her back her own words. I did not need to. She was going to carry them herself regardless of whether I mentioned them. My sister found me by the food table. We talked easily, the way we had been talking since the cafe, which was not the way we had talked before, more honestly, with less performed certainty on her side. Her youngest, who was 5, came running up and grabbed my hand and said, "Are you my Aunt Jess?" And I said yes. She said, "Mom said you have a really cool apartment." I said I did. She said, "Can I come see it?" I said someday, yes. I walked back to my car 2 hours later feeling something that took me a moment to name. Not triumph. Not the satisfaction of having proven something. More like completion. Like a circle that had been open for 18 months had quietly, without announcement, finished drawing itself. I sat in my car and I looked at my parents' house, the same house where I had called from the spare bedroom, the same number my mother had picked up from, the same walls inside where my sister had told me to think carefully before doing something I could not undo. 18 months. 18 months of mornings and courses and saved dollars and therapy and running by the river and cooking dinner alone and learning, one slow ordinary day at a time, to be someone I recognized. I started my car. I drove home to my apartment, the one with the balcony that catches the morning light, the one where I have made dinner every night for a year, the one where I sleep well and wake up knowing what I am doing and why. I am 36 years old. I manage 2 dental practice locations and am in conversation with Sandra about a third. I run 4 mornings a week. I have friends, real ones, built slowly, the way real things are built. I see Dr. Okafor once a month now instead of every 2 weeks, which she said last session was a sign, and I believed her. My family is in my life, carefully, in the amounts that work. My mother calls on Sundays. My sister and I have lunch every 6 weeks. My cousin Bev has a standing invitation to the farmer's market, which she takes up about half the time. My aunt sent me a plant for my new apartment when I moved in. A succulent, small, in a blue pot. It is on my kitchen windowsill. I water it on Tuesdays. I have not spoken to David. I want to leave you with the thing that stays with me most from all of it. Not the promotion, not the apartment, not the look on my aunt's face at the birthday party. The thing that stays with me is the floor. The floor of the spare bedroom, 2 suitcases and a garbage bag, 30 years old with $412 and a family that had given me 2 weeks. I go back to that floor sometimes in my mind. Not to punish myself with it, but to remember something important about what I found there, which is that it was the first moment in 5 years that I was entirely on my own. No one managing the money. No one with opinions about my time. No one deciding, quietly and patiently and completely, who I was. Just me and the floor and the 2 weeks my aunt had given me. I used every single day of them. And then I used the 18 months after that. And then I kept going. Because that is the thing no one tells you about starting over from nothing. The nothing is not the problem. The nothing is where you find out what you actually have. What I had was myself. It turned out that was enough to start with. It turned out to be more than enough. My family left when I had nowhere to go. 18 months later they couldn't recognize my life. Neither could I, some days. But I recognized myself. And that was the whole point. There is something I left out of the story I just told you. Not because it is unimportant, it is, in some ways, the most important thing. But because it took me a long time to find the right words for it, and I am still not certain I have them. It is about what happened inside me during those 18 months. Not the job, not the apartment, not the promotions and the courses and the savings account. Those things are real and they matter. But they are the outside of the story. I want to tell you the inside. The inside was harder. The inside was the Tuesday morning in month 4 when I woke up at 4 a.m. and could not remember, for a full 30 seconds, what I was doing. Not in the confused way of early morning. In the deeper way. I lay in my apartment in the dark and I asked myself what I was building and who I was building it for and whether any of it was real or whether I was just performing recovery the same way I had spent 5 years performing contentment, going through the motions of a life without the actual life inside it. I lay there and I did not have an answer and I let myself not have one. That is something Dr. Okafor had been working on with me. The not having. I had spent 5 years in a relationship with a man who had an answer for everything, and before that I had spent my whole life in a family where certainty was the highest currency, where not knowing something was a kind of weakness and weakness was the thing no one in that house could afford to show. Learning to lie in the dark at 4 in the morning with a question that had no answer and not try to resolve it, that was the work. That was the invisible work that the promotions and the running and the certification were surrounding. I called Dr. Okafor the next morning and told her about the 4 a.m. She listened. She asked what I had done with it. I said I had lain there and let it be a question. She said that was the right thing. I said it did not feel like the right thing. It felt like failing. She said, that's because you've been taught that certainty is the same as safety. It isn't. Certainty is just one way of not being afraid. Sitting with not knowing is braver. I have thought about that many times since. About the difference between certainty and safety. About the years I spent inside David's certainty, which felt like safety and was actually the opposite, a container so complete that I had forgotten I was in one. My own uncertainty, at 4 in the morning in my small apartment, was terrifying and also free. I chose free. There was a woman on my running route. I want to tell you about her because she matters. Her name, I learned eventually, was Patricia. She was 60-something, gray hair, very fast for her age, the kind of runner who has been doing it long enough that the movement looks like breathing, automatic, necessary, entirely without effort. I passed her on the river path almost every morning for the first 6 weeks without speaking because that is the way of morning runners, a nod at most, acknowledgement without intrusion. Then one morning she was stopped at the bench near the water, stretching, and I stopped too because the bench was the landmark I used for my halfway point and she was there. She looked up. She said, "You're out here every morning." I said I was. She said, "New habit or old one?" I said new. She said, "You can always tell. New runners have that look like they're arguing with themselves about whether to stop." I laughed. I said that was accurate. She said her name. I said mine. She asked how long I had been in the neighborhood. I said 3 months. She said she had been there for 11 years and it was a good place to land. I said I was beginning to see that. We ran the second half of the route together that morning, without talking much, just running, and when we got back to the starting point she said see you tomorrow like it was already decided, and it was. Patricia became, over the months that followed, something that is hard to name exactly. Not a mentor, she was not in the business of advice. Not a friend in the way people usually mean that word, though she was friendly. More like a witness. She was out there every morning and so was I and we ran together several days a week and sometimes we talked and sometimes we did not and both were fine. She knew the outline of my situation because I told her one morning when something about the river and the light made me more open than usual. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. When I finished she said, "And how long ago was that?" I said 7 months. She said, "You're doing well." Not as a compliment. As an assessment. She ran for 30 years and she had, I understood, a way of reading a person by how they moved, and the moving told her something. I ran toward myself every morning. Patricia saw it happening. When I got the promotion, I told her at the bench. She did a small nod, the one she did when something confirmed what she already believed. She said, "What did I tell you?" I said she had not told me anything specific. She said, "Exactly. I still run. Different city now. My apartment in Austin is near a park that has a good loop, 3 miles, with a bridge in the middle where you can see the whole skyline on a clear morning. I do not have a Patricia yet in Austin. But I keep my eyes open on the path. I want to tell you about the money. Not as a brag, I am deeply aware that what I built was built from a position of relative privilege, that I had a job to go back to and a car that worked and a cousin with a spare bedroom, that many people in worse situations have fewer of those things. I want to tell you about it because it was, for me, the most concrete measure of what happens when you stop letting someone else manage your life. Month 1, $412 in savings. $200 added at the end of the month. Month 3, I had just over $1,000 for the first time since my early 20s. I remember looking at the number and feeling something physical, an actual sensation in my chest, which I later understood was the feeling of having a buffer. Of being 1 month away from disaster instead of 3 days away. Month 6, 2000. I started a small retirement account because Dr. Okafor mentioned in passing that one of the concrete signs of a stable life was the ability to think about the future in practical terms, and I wanted that sign. Month 9, salary increase from the new position. I upgraded my savings contribution and did not upgrade my life in any other way because I had learned something in those months about the difference between needing things and wanting them, and I was in no hurry. Month 12, I had more money in savings than I had ever had at any point in my adult life. The number is not the point. The feeling attached to it is the point, which was, I built this. With no one managing it, no one deciding where it went, no one with opinions about what I did or did not deserve. Just me and my work and the decision, repeated every month, to put something away. I thought about that first $200 a lot in those months. $200 is almost nothing. It is also the first stone of everything. Sandra asked me something once, about 4 months after the promotion, when we were working late on the setup for the new location. She asked how I was doing, meaning it the real way, not the hallway way. I said I was good. I said it was the truest thing I had said to that question in years. She said she had watched me change. Not the skills had always been there, she said. Something else. She said I seemed more here. Like I was fully in the room now in a way that she had not always been certain of before. I said I thought that was accurate. She said, "Can I ask what happened?" I thought about how to answer that. About how much of the story lived inside the question and how long an honest answer would take. I said, I stopped letting someone else decide who I was. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "Good." Just that. Good. In the flat certain voice of a woman who had built something herself and understood what that required. I think about that conversation when things are hard. When I am tired, which I still am sometimes, because building things is tiring even when you want to build them. When I question a decision or second guess a choice. I stopped letting someone else decide who I was. Good. I should tell you about the apartment in Austin, because the Austin apartment is how this chapter ends. I had been with the practice for 14 months, managing 2 locations, when Sandra told me she was expanding again. A new market. Another city. She wanted me to go set it up, to be the person on the ground who built the new location from nothing, and then, if I wanted it, to stay and run it as a regional manager. I had been in my apartment for 13 months at that point. I had made it mine, a rug I chose, curtains I hung, a little gallery wall of prints from a street market, The cookbook I had worked through twice now, starting a third pass. I had made the neighborhood mine. I had friends running Saturday markets. I said yes to Sandra anyway. Because I had learned something important about myself in the previous year and a half. I had learned that I was not someone who needed things to stay the same in order to feel safe. I had been kept still for 5 years, everything managed and static and controlled, and I had thought that stillness was safety. It was not safety. It was captivity. I liked moving. I liked building from nothing because I knew now that I could. The apartment in Austin was not starting over, it was expanding. There is a difference. Starting over implies that what came before was a failure. I do not think that way anymore. What came before was preparation. I packed my things. I gave the rug to Bev because it was too big for my car. I kept the curtains because they were the first thing I had chosen for a home in years and I intended to hang them somewhere else. I took the cookbook. I took the photograph from the gallery wall that I liked most, which was a print of a bridge over a river, because I had run past a bridge every morning for 14 months and that had mattered. I drove to Austin on a Saturday in September. 8 hours, most of it through flat country that got less flat as I got further west, the landscape changing gradually the way things change when you are moving towards something new. I arrived at my new apartment at 6 in the evening, the light going golden outside the windows, the balcony catching it. I stood in the empty apartment with my curtains over my arm and my cookbook under my elbow and I looked at what I had, a room, a view, a job to go to on Monday. 18 months ago I had the floor of a spare bedroom in 2 weeks and $412. I thought, look what you built. I hung the curtains. I unpacked the cookbook. I made dinner on the first night in my new kitchen, something from the middle section of the book that I had made before and knew well, and I ate it at the windowsill because I did not have a table yet, watching Austin settle into evening below me. My mother called at 8. She said, how was the drive? I said, long and good. She said she missed me already. I said I would visit at Christmas. She said, I'm proud of you, Jess. I want you to know that. I thought about the phone call from the spare bedroom. The one where she said it was not a good time. I thought about how much had happened between that call and this one. I said, thank you, Mom. I meant it. Not as forgiveness, not completely, not yet. But as the honest response to an honest thing. She was proud of me. I had done something worth being proud of. Both things were true and I could hold both of them without needing to resolve them into something simpler. I put the phone down and I looked at Austin in the dark, lit and moving, a city that did not know me yet. I was 36 years old. I was starting something new in a city that did not know me yet. I had curtains I chose and a cookbook I loved and a savings account and a title and a self I recognized when I looked in the mirror. 18 months from the floor. My family laughed when I had nowhere to go. I went somewhere anyway. I am still going. That is the whole story. Or the beginning of it. The part 1 can tell you now, from here, from this window, with this view. The rest I am still writing. But I know who is writing it. That is new. That is everything.